You want me to go? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming to our webinar this evening of behavioral change and COVID-19. We have with us this evening Cecilia Neblett-Brathwaite, who is the president of the Caribbean Association of Behavioral Change Practitioners, Cheryl Belcher-Peart, vice president of that association as well, and David Ellis, our COVID-19 public advisor in Barbados. I am going to introduce them by way of their short bio. And as I would have said, Cecilia is the president of the association. She holds a master's and a bachelor's. She holds a master's and a bachelor's with honors in social work from the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. Mrs. Neblett-Brathwaite also successfully completed the associate degree in marketing management, a certificate in technical vocational training and adult education from Erdeston Training College, and certificates in paralegal studies and substance abuse counseling from the Barbados Community College. She's a certified guidance counselor from the University of the West Indies Open Campus. Mrs. Neblett-Brathwaite facilitated with the National Productivity Councils and the Final Creative Workshop. She has also lectured at the University of the West Indies and the Samuel Jackman Prescott Polytechnic. She contributes on occasion to the Better Health magazine and the International Labour Organization. Our next presenter Cheryl. And just bear with me for a little bit because my laptop is loading rather slowly tonight. Cheryl, a practicing behavioral change communication specialist, describes herself as a consummate communicator, having held several positions in the area of public relations, advertising, and behavioral change communication. She has been the Regional HIV Prevention Technical Officer, working out of the Western Regional Health Authority for over 16 years, and has the responsibility for developing, implementing, monitoring, and evaluation of the HIV and sexually transmitted infection prevention programs in the 4 Western parishes of Jamaica. With her considerable experience as a public relations and marketing professional, Mrs. Belcher-Peart possesses the unique advantage of being able to deliver a high-quality customer experience to both public and private sector clients, and is well known for her excellent people skill in many spheres of influence. She has been an adjunct lecturer at the University of the West Indies Western Jamaican campus since 2013, and enjoys engaging and challenging her students in the areas of communication, social marketing, and communications analysis. Mrs. Belcher-Peart is parent of 2 young adults and best friends with her very active 2.5-year-old grandson. She enjoys good company and a good live band. Our lone gentleman on the panel this evening, Mr. David Ellis. David Ellis is Barbados' COVID-19 public advisor, a post he took up in September 2021. He is a former station manager with the Starcom network and has served as a broadcast journalist for close to 50 years. He has been a broadcast journalist and broadcaster for more than 4 decades, as indicated, having first joined the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation in 1974 as a reporter. He then became director of news at Radio Antilles in Montserrat from 1979 to 1981. Returning to Barbados, he worked at what was then Barbados Diffusion as a senior reporter, establishing himself over as one of the country's leading broadcast journalists and producers in a career that has seen him as newsreader, moderator, interviewer, program manager, and trainer of broadcasters in Barbados and elsewhere in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our panelists. These are our panelists for tonight. And I would hand over now to our team so that they can start their presentation.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I want to thank you for coming out this evening to this active discussion on COVID-19 and behavior change. I want you to have a good night tonight, but I want there to be active discussion on the matter since it's the topic that is pertinent to the transitioning of our island into a safer and better space. Let us begin. First, we want to explain the theory of planned behavior, because we're going to be looking at behavior change. You know, we heard a lot of information about behavior change and COVID-19. So I just want to give you some brief tidbits, some comments, some information, some education on behavior change so that you can better understand your role and function in this process. The theory of planned behavior. The theory of planned behavior starts at a theory of action. It started in 1980 to actually predict behavior. The theory was explained as behaviors over which persons have the ability to take control of their own actions. And I sourced this from Can and Fabergar in 2017. This was a journal in 2017, and it speaks to how the behavior change model was formed. I know that of recent, you've been hearing a lot about it because of the COVID-19 situation, but this behavior triangulates itself into many other disciplines. For example, we can have it within the tourist industry, we can have it in schools, we can have it in agriculture, we can have it in environment. So the behavior change model is a model that can be transformed into different segments of our population in different areas and with different backgrounds, because it's the foundation where everything starts with a basic behavior. Behavior change is the context of public health. It's a public health model, basically, and it refers to the efforts put in place to change people's personal habits and attitudes. So it's a public health intervention. So it starts right there with the Ministry of Health and Wellness and with all the public health agencies across the world. We were looking at starting and changing behavior for the good, or we're looking at dispelling myths, some of the myths that exist as a result of the negative impacts of behavior. For example, to encourage you wearing a mask, regular sanitization. We're looking at vaccine hesitancy, looking at social distancing, 6 feet. So we're looking at encouraging positive behaviors and dispelling the negative myths surrounding COVID-19. Change. Change is a big word in the COVID-19 situation, as with HIV, because you recognize that you hear about the similarities now with COVID-19 and HIV. You hear about the discrimination and stigma, and you're hearing about, you know, persons are not comfortable in other person's spaces. So they have some similarities, and you recognize that behavior change in HIV, it was so difficult to get persons from one area of HIV to the next. And these are some of the challenges that we're experiencing now with the COVID-19 virus as well. Oh, we are going to talk about the whys. Persons are asking you why you're doing all these things, why you have all this information on television, why you have the ads, why you're so worried about the COVID-19 virus. You're going to be looking at its relationship with finances and the revenue for our government. We're looking at the religious aspect to it. We're looking at the strikes and the demonstrations and the marches. We have to make sure that we meet the needs of all of our population and all of our target groups. So we have to make sure that we create interventions to target the behaviors of these specific groups. I gave some data from the statistical department in 2010 because we're now conducting our current census 2020-2021. So this is data from the last census, but I thought that it was also important to show how many older persons exist in our communities. If you look at the chart right here, we're looking at the 50 and over population. So we see that the 50 to 59 population, the males, we have 17,110. 13% of the population. And for the females, we have 18,933. 13% of the population, giving you 33,047 or 36,047. We're looking at a great percentage of our population being over 50 to 80 plus population. So that is why it's pertinent that we create our behavior change strategies so that we can bring about behavior change in our society, so that we will reduce the levels of death within this population, within our senior population, which we deem most vulnerable at this time. And if you're going to go further and look at the other areas of the chart, you recognize basically that's the same thing that we're going to be getting here, where we have probably lesser persons in the 60-69 population, but you also recognize the vast numbers of individuals that you would find in that target group. So this is really interesting, and we will wait to see what the new census information brings. That is why it's important to give this information to the census and all these agencies that come around to gather the information, because they're looking at making life better for you. So please, whenever you see them come around, please give of your best, please interact with them, share, give them your thoughts so that we can get information, so that we can create better programs for you. We're going to be looking now at the behavior change model. We're asking all the time, what is behavior change? We hear a lot about it. We know what is behavior, but how important it is to change our behavior. So you see 5 icons on these steps. You have the pre-contemplation, you have the contemplation, you have the preparation, the action, and the maintenance stage. When you're looking at the pre-contemplation stage, that is your stage, for example, where there's denial. Like, for example, with the vaccine right now, there's denial. Persons don't want to hear about vaccines. Persons don't want to take the vaccine. There's actually denial. Some persons are not considering it. This is the stage where you see all of this things going on at the pre-contemplation stage, where persons are in denial of the consequence of not taking the vaccination. But we have to get strategies at this stage. And every stage of this model, there are strategies. We can look at rethinking the behavior model at this time, analyzing yourself. We are looking at assessing the risk at this juncture in your life. So for example, if you're interviewing a group of persons, you want to know who is at the pre-contemplation stage, so that you will know who's at the denial stage. What programs I need to build on to assist persons in this group in the denial stage. Then you can go up the ladder. You're going to be looking at the contemplation. So I'm now contemplating if I should take this vaccine. Should I? I'm rethinking my behavior. I'm going to be analyzing myself and the actions of others, assessing risks. That's what I'm going to do at this stage, because I'm not contemplating if I should or if I should not. Weighing your options. So if you're looking at working with persons in the population, you have to make sure that you get the data, and then you create programs to work with persons who are now contemplating, should I or shouldn't I? They're not in the denial stage, they're contemplating. So I need to give them a push in another area. So these are the strategies that you need to use. And if you're looking at the preparation stage, you're experimenting with small change. Should I? Shouldn't I? You're looking at collecting information, and there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of information out there from all the different agencies. You're looking at the different social groups. You're looking at the different musicians. You're looking at the different religious groups. You're looking at the activists. You're looking at all these persons having all this data. So you're just wondering, where am I going to get the correct data from? So this is the preparation stage. You're experimenting with small sets of data, collecting information, but a strategy will be to look at these set of information, look at these set of individuals, so you can create programs to meet the needs of these individuals. These persons are actually at the stage where they would listen to you. They're looking for the right information. They're looking for correct information. They're looking at data. They're looking to see how best they can make an informed decision with the data that is out there. But we have to make sure that we have the correct data so that we can give them this data and help them to make the best decision possible. So then action can take place. You're looking at action, you're looking at goals, you're looking at showing them where they can access your services, what time the bus will be there, where you can get the vaccination, where you can get a test, a PCR test. This is the page where persons have now decided, after they've gone into the pre-contemplation, contemplation, and preparation stage, this is time for action. I've waited too long. So This is the stage at which we work quickly to see how best we can help persons to reach the goal of vaccination. You know, we're looking at reducing the hesitancy. So this is the stage where we have to put a lot of effort in when we recognize we have persons at this stage. That's where the strategy of reward can be sometimes. Sometimes you would reward persons, or sometimes you would provide information that they can think that they're rewarded by making this important step in their lives. And the fifth stage is maintenance. How would I maintain this? Maintenance is very important, because you may just go for the first vaccination and then you don't want to go for the second or the booster. So you have to make sure that this maintenance stage is also as important as the contemplation stage or the action stage, because we want to make sure that we maintain. And in maintaining this, persons get over the thresholds. We're looking at herd immunity. So we want to make sure that when we maintain, persons go from one stage to the next and see the value of going from one stage to the next in the vaccination process. And the sixth stage I didn't put here, because this is a 5-stage model, but some models also have the relapse. Persons sometimes are disappointed, they feel a little ill, I'm not going to go anymore. Or some persons may say, hey, look, I've gone for my PCR test, but I'm not going to go right home. I'm going to stop at the petrol station. I'm going to go to the supermarket. I'm going to take some things from mommy because I can't come back out of my home. So sometimes, although we have that information, persons relapse. So that is why it's so important. Just as when we have the HIV testing, that we counsel persons right there to let them know of their responsibility with respect to the COVID-19 virus. Your responsibility is to go home, and how important it is. And why is it important to go home? Because then if you are tested positive, then you would have contracted this virus and you pass it on to so many different people. So this is the case of relapse that sometimes we must also work with. But then you recognize something in relapse, sometimes things go wrong, and then you learn from them, and you're better able to advocate to your peers, advocate to your family members, what not to do. So these are all the stages that we need to see where our persons in the community are at with respect to how they're thinking, how they're feeling, how we can create better strategies to meet the needs of each and every individual. And when you're looking at meeting the needs of every individual, we're looking at the model, which was developed by Fournette in 2018. We're looking at identifying 4 unprotected and underprotected population groups that could inform vaccine strategies developed by local authorities. When we're looking at hesitancy, the unconcerned, the poorly reached, and the active resistor. All of these are persons that we need to focus our information to, and we need to look at our interventions on our strategies. We need to look at the persons who are hesitant, those who have concerns about perceived safety. We need to look at persons who are unconcerned. I just don't care about no vaccine. I'm not interested. We have to target these persons as well. And the persons who are poorly reached, persons who no one ever tries to go through the gap, persons may think, well, we're not catering to those set of people. We have to make sure those persons communicate with other persons. We have to look at the poorly reached and the active resistor. I'm going to advocate. I'm going to make a lot of noise. I am an active resistor. I have to get my following. I have to get persons on board, because this is where we are at in my mind. So we need now to look at the COVID-19 vaccinations. WHO 2019 Vaccine Advisory Group attributes hesitancy to a number of things. Complacency. Some person said, you know what? The vaccine ban or the vaccine areas are in St. Philip today, but I feel a little ill, so I'm not going to go today because I have to go to a wedding on Saturday, or I have something to do, so I'm not going to go today. You're being so complacent, but that's just a temporary fix to a long-term solution of health. So then you look at things like the inconvenience of getting up and going to get your vaccination and having to wait in the lines and stuff like that. Persons look at that, this is inconvenient, but look at the positives. So when you're creating your programs, you build your strategies on all of these positives with respect to vaccination. And the lack of confidence. Sometimes we don't have confidence in our healthcare providers because we are usually, some persons say we're usually a place of democracy where we have our own beliefs and we're allowed to think and we're allowed to make our own decisions. But in doing that, sometimes we get a lot of negatives from the outsiders. We have to have strong messaging so that persons will feel confident in our healthcare system. And in doing that, we can refer to other vaccine situations. We had the H1N1, we had the rubella, we had the chickenpox, we had other vaccines. Yes, this is a whole different level, but we must also refer to things where we were successful in and areas where we were successful in. And you can find this in Pitch, Lobet, and DeClement 2020. These are new articles that I researched to glean some of this information because this was very important in the fight for COVID-19. We're going to look at the hesitancy again. As the numbers of vaccinated persons increase, you're looking at two-edged sword, the adverse side effects that may become familiar and health. That's a two-edged sword. Am I going to feel ill for a little bit, couple of days or so, or am I going to be healthy for the long term? So you have to understand the two-edged swords and target and create your programs focusing on these issues relating to the individual. We're looking at health communication strategies. We're looking at the social behavioral factors that can affect vaccine intake. That is why the census is so important. That is why research is so important, because our demographic data gives us a solid foundation to create all of these programs to assist us with our vaccine intake. We're looking at social behavior and cultural behavior practices. They are all important as well, because culturally, persons receive information differently. And when we're looking at our programs, we need to make sure they're culturally specific to Barbados and the demographic to which we are catering to. And we look at all the intentional gaps. What are the gaps in data? What are the gaps with vaccination hesitancy? What are the gaps with research? What are the gaps in intervention? What are the gaps in promotion? What are the gaps in our health plans and our health policies that we can bring this pandemic under some level of control, because we need to tighten our belt when it comes to looking for strategies to fill these gaps. So we need to be strategic so that we can come up with a plan, a holistic approach, targeting these specific areas that have these strategic challenges. And when we're looking at talk about the census and we talk about the research with the critical mission, and we're looking at the population characteristics. If you need to know what a person is like, you need to know about the characteristics. But right now, persons are unemployed, uneducated. We have few social systems, so we have few levels of support. They're hopeless, they're angry. Rebellion is going to take place. We have overload. We have government mistrust. We have religious affiliations and opinions. We have conspiracies. So when we're looking at the characteristics of our population and we're looking at building out and developing programs, we have to take all of these things into consideration. Because if I'm going to go on the block, for example, and speak to the boys on the block who may be upset, may be angry, they may be frustrated, they may not have as much education as the other person, I have to go with a different approach. If I'm working with the persons who have, for example, mistrust, I have to go with a different approach. So we need to have interventions. We have to know how to communicate and connect with our populations so that we can glean the information that we need to create these programs that we need to reduce this level of mistrust in the vaccination, mistrust in all the other areas with respect to COVID-19, because we need to have everybody on board to see how best we can make this country a better place again, because we need to have our tourists on board, we need to have our kids back at school, we need to have all of these areas that we're accustomed to and that we find so appealing to us, all going to the parties, having crop over, all these things that we want to do. We have to make sure that the foundation is research so that we can create our program, so that we can begin to reduce these numbers, so that we can open up our borders more, and so that we can have our face-to-face classes, so that we can even have levels of employment And all of these are issues so that we can provide social support. And when we do research, we not only find information to assist us with COVID-19, but we get information to assist us with all the other areas in our life so that we can build a holistic approach to make Barbados a better place. Yes, we're hearing about a republic, and this is our beautiful Barbados. We have one country, yes, we are part of the Caribbean, but we have to make sure that we have all hands on deck. And in saying that, I really want to salute these young men and women who are working tirelessly. We have Dr. Antron Best, we have Dr. Corey Ford, we have Miss Ingrid Cattle-Rowe. We have so many persons out there giving up their best to make sure we have Mr. Ellis here giving up his best to make sure that this is not an easy time for us, but we have so many persons out there on the front line and persons who are not on the front line, just giving up their best to make sure we have our Honorable Prime Minister, Ms. Mia Moore-Motley, giving up their best to make sure that we have a safe and happy Barbados. So in all of this, we have to give thanks that we have a wealth of resource and information out there to fight this pandemic. And these are all the areas. We have our beautiful beaches, not as many tourists as before. Our young lady here, she wants to go back to school because the Zoom, even for me who is studying the Zoom, this Zoom tires you out in a bit. We have the elderly person here, they're not wearing their mask correctly. We have the sex workers who we are not catering to, but they're still in active work despite the pandemic and despite the closures, they are still in active work. So we must also cater to that small but interesting segment of our population that we really forget to mention. We have to cater to our sex workers. And these are the boys here. These are the boys on the block. They're not wearing their mask correctly. They're just involved with each other, walking, having a good time. So the question is, where is Barbados going? Where are we going to go as a result of coming together, building a good, solid community and a solid foundation by reducing our numbers of COVID-19 so that we can get back to some level of normalcy? Yes, behavior change strategies. What is the goal? Goal is to save lives. The mission, critical statement to save lives. So to save lives, we have to educate. We have persons in our centers just sitting there. We have to educate. We have to take our programs to the centers. And I said that more than once. Take our programs to the centers. You're just sitting there idly waiting for their discharge. We can take our programs to them. We can do our research so that they can inform behavior. By the time they go home again, they'll be taking new information back into the communities so that the discrimination would not be so heavy right now. We can also, persons who are at home and they are under quarantine, we can also have programs for them. We can do research there so we can inform them of their responsibilities to their families. So they would stay, you know, they don't have to have monitors, but they will have a responsibility to our society and family and self so that they would know that, hey, look, I'm in quarantine. I can't take the risk of just going out or going to help my mommy. So we have to make sure the education is there at the community level. We have to make sure there's herd immunity. We have to make sure that they reduce vaccine hesitancy. We have to engage to understand. And in doing that, we have to go right down at the grassroots level. That is how we engage to understand. We have to engage by going right down at the grassroots level, making the information so simple that every one of us can understand. The principles to support behavior change communication. Accurate understanding. We look at the barriers to vaccine hesitancy. Acknowledge and validate the concerns and the apprehensions of each and every one of us. They are all valid in their own right. We have to address these concerns and reduce vaccine hesitancy. So even if you need to go to church, as I do with HIV, I sometimes have to go, if I'm working with the Christian Mission, which are usually ladies in the 50 and older age group, I have to go and talk about the Bible before I get to HIV because I have to meet them where they're at. So sometimes we have to do that. We have to look at targeting populations and how they receive this information, adapting to change in the community, which is better our sentiment. We have to look at all the barriers that we have to go through. in order to get this information across the public. What are some of these barriers that the health system is facing? What are some of these barriers that the doctor is facing? What are some of these barriers that the nurses are facing? What are some of these barriers that the students are facing? We have to cross all of these barriers to make sure that we get the information across to meet each and every individual. We're looking at targeting specific strategies to specific information, to specific individuals, because you can, as I said before, you cannot give granny the same information that you're going to give the boys on the block. So you have to make sure that it's creative, it is interesting, you know, you're engaging. All of these are things that we need to do to get our message across. Pros and cons of COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken place within the context of an increased anti-vaccinated culture in our society. It's taken place in an anti-vaccinated culture. The messages appealing to fear and stress, the risk has been labeled as conspiracies to the society, and it pressures the society. So persons are scared because they lack information, they lack the correct information, they lack the knowledge, they lack persons that they can trust. So therefore we have to make sure that we go over and we cement and we triangulate our methods to make sure that we find the appropriate solution for each and every person. We have to promote human rights. And one of the human rights that persons talk about is, should I be forced to take a vaccine? But one of the human rights is for a society to take care of the population. That is a human right as well. We must not be afraid to take controversial steps as long as they are for the overall good of a society. We have to. It is equally as important to begin to develop behavior change interventions to reduce negativity of anti-COVID-19 behaviors. So we have to make sure that we recreate and recreate our interventions to make sure that we reduce the negativity of the COVID-19, the anti-COVID-19 behavior. And in doing this, before I give a word to Mr. Ellis, what I want to say is that although the behavior change approach seeks to encourage and encourage other disciplines so that we can all come together to form some strategic plan to reduce the levels of hesitancy and to increase the vaccine intake. However, we want to enforce that behavior change is a specialized field that needs expert direction. And I want to say that Mr. Ellis has been doing a wonderful job with his team as well. And I want to lend the behavior change practitioners to in whatever area we can to see how best we can assist our government and assist our people in having a more holistic approach to reducing the levels of HIV in our community. So I'll now have a word from Mr. Ellis. Thank you.
Good evening, Cecilia. Thank you very much for having me in this session. As I told you, this is an area that I have come into after spending quite a number of years in media. And I suppose that in many ways, as a media practitioner, I've helped to influence change in the country. I often hear a reference to the HIV/AIDS pandemic and what was done back then. But when I was a young reporter, I used to go into a newsroom in the morning, and when I came out in the evening, all of my clothes and my hair and everything smelled of smoke. The people who worked with me, many of them smoked cigarettes in the newsroom. Today, across Barbados, it is difficult for me to see people smoking in public. And I want to say that it is the first example of behavioral change that I can point to. And if we were successful with that, then we can be successful in other areas, because my recollection is that was virtually a one-man fight back then. It is not the same fight today, because when Dr. Tony Gale, who I consider to be that one-man army, decided to take to the media, he didn't have to confront the social media. He didn't have to confront the political instigation that comes out of the United States from the conservatives and the far right, who are helping to lay a foundation of disinformation, misinformation, and mistrust. What we have today is a complex situation facing us. And I agree 100% with a lot of what you have identified as the strategies that we need to put in place. But we must always bear in mind that these strategies also bring with them costs. And there has already been a lot of money that Caribbean countries, because I don't speak about Barbados alone. I think that when we look at this problem, we have to look at it across the board. Caribbean countries have had to put a lot of resources behind COVID already. And I do concede that, in my own judgment, I don't think that perhaps if we had the opportunity to look at it more closely, we might have put measures similar to those that you have identified in place much earlier. But this is where we are right now. And I look forward to a conversation this evening that will take us in the direction of being able to look at what are some of the common approaches, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, because I feel more than anything else that this is an opportunity for us to speak as a region to solutions, because all too often we look at it from the perspective of one country doing its thing, another country doing its thing. This is an opportunity for us to be more united, look for approaches that work, adapt approaches that may be more applicable to our particular environments. And significantly enough, COVID may give us the opportunity to really get back to the community. The discussion that we are having all the time is about the degree to which social media is influencing everything. But I worked in a radio station which developed a concept years ago called the Road Runner. And it was the broadcaster went out into the community to talk with people. But you know what was the real attraction for the advertiser? It was that people could see the product, that direct contact. And that is what we have been missing in many of the things that we do. This is an opportunity for us to find mechanisms to communicate more directly with the people on matters that are of importance to them. So let me stop here for now, because I am more interested in the discussion than in you hearing me. Thank you.
Thank you. But what I want to say about that, Mr. Ellis, is that is why we decided to form the Caribbean Behavior Change Association of Practitioners, so that we can have persons from the region, because my colleague here, Ms. Pratt, is from Jamaica. So that is why we formed the Caribbean Association of Regional Practitioners for Behavior Change, so that we can support each other in this fight. You know, if Ms. Pratt needs me in Jamaica, I'm here because of Zoom, and I need her in Barbados, so she is here. So that is why we sought to come together as a region to see how best we can engage each other. So you are indeed right.
Thank you. I look forward to hearing from her as well.
Right. And I think that's a great segue to go into my presentation. Thanks so much. Good evening, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be here at this forum. I must say, Cecilia, thanks for inviting me. It has been a passion to, you know, have the Caribbean people come together to discuss issues such as these and with relation to behavior change as well. So this is not an academic presentation per se. These are my thoughts as a behavior change practitioner who, you know, basically went through COVID as well. All right. So I'm going to give a bit of a background of the Jamaican situation, looking at some of the data with regard to COVID-19 and some of the knowledge, attitude, and behaviors of Jamaicans. I'm going to examine did behaviors change, and are we facing a new and emerging theory about behavior change? And I need to acknowledge the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women for 2021. You notice I'm representing with my purple there. So I wanted to just speak of that as well. Right. So in terms of our background, our first case was in March 2020. Our total cases to date, that's at 90,961. And we have had deaths totaling 2,367. Our cases since November 11 to 24, that has been reduced to 1,087. And remarkably, our population has been infected from as early as a day old and up to 108 years of age. And I mean, that to me is just a dilemma in terms of our elderly population who had survived to, I mean, good years of 190s being taken out by COVID. So that is also something that I feel very strongly about in terms of us keeping them safe. Currently, our home quarantine, according this data I took from the Ministry of Health, Jamaica, people on home quarantine, 47,000, and the number recovered from the infection, the COVID-19 infection, 62,171. So that's basically a background as to where Jamaica is in terms of the infection. Currently, Jamaica is offering the vaccines, 3 types of vaccines, the Pfizer, the Johnson & Johnson, and the AstraZeneca vaccines. Recently, it was announced in the media that I think it was Saturday, that we received Sinopharm, and we got 200 doses courtesy of the People's Republic of China. And just this month, Jamaica hit that 1 million vaccinated mark on the 7th of November. It was a celebratory event. But just to break that down a bit, what that means is that some 650,000 people have gotten at least 1 dose, or 22% of the population, 22%, and 499, just under 500,000 people have been fully vaccinated. So of that, the 17% of the population. What is interesting to note is that Jamaica has had to dump over 200,000 expired vaccines in this process, all right? So that speaks to a number of issues. We can look at, you know, what those issues are. But what is risk communication? I know, Cecilia, thanks much for giving all of that detail on behavior change communication. And for us as risk communicators, we look at risk communication as a public health. In a public health emergency, risk communication includes stuff that speaks to preparedness, what is supposed to be our response, the recovery phases of the epidemic, and all of this is done in an effort to get informed decision making. And as Cecilia says, positive behavior change and to maintain the trust. So all of that needs to come together, the messaging, the response, and the maintenance of trust. In Jamaica, what I saw, as I'm saying, I'm doing this from the lens of a practitioner. In terms of the communication and the messaging that I saw going out in Jamaica, there was quite a bit of the development of information, education, and communication material. And there were posters, brochures, videos, all using traditional and new media. So the development of the IEC is important so that we can get to that first platform of the behavior change, the pre-contemplation and the contemplation, as well as the awareness. So that, I think, was a big plus in terms of how Jamaica treated with the development of the information. And we all had access to this information coming out of the health centers, coming out of the Ministry of Health, the different regional health authorities. There was a lot of information. Traditional and new media was used heavily. I mean, everywhere you turn, there was something with regard to COVID-19. I mean, you could even say that it would be a situation where
She was looking at, can I go on until she comes? She was looking at risk communication messaging, looking at the development of information education, communication material, and traditional and non-traditional media. We can focus on the traditional and non-traditional media because both are important. Social media, particularly the WhatsApp, very important in today's fight. Since the younger generation, the younger target population use this medium, we can see it now with all of our.
Thanks so much, Cecilia. I'm sorry for that disruption. There's just some things that happen when you least expect them to. Right. So I'm speaking about the traditional and new media. Traditional and new media, which was used, especially using social media, as Cecilia is pointing out to us, WhatsApp in particular. A lot of information was shared via WhatsApp. So the videos were shared, the posters were shared, you know, information concerning vaccine, you know, was shared. But of course, you know that competing with that was also all the other information coming at the target audience from the social media as well. So that was an interesting development. How do people select what information to believe, and how do you get them to change a behavior in a situation where they're being bombarded with so much information and so much is happening at the same time? So let's look at, did Jamaicans change their behavior? And when we look at there's a November 2020 study that Facebook did in collaboration with Johns Hopkins Center for Communication Programs. And in that study, it did show that the knowledge, behaviors, and attitudes of persons, that's in November, had been changing. This percentages were in the 90s and 80s. You know, people were reporting. This is a study that looked at approximately 3,333 participants, that, you know, people were hand washing, they were sanitizing, the physical distancing, and that was taking place. So in terms of whether or not behaviors change, yes, they did. And, you know, we could look at probably some of the theories that we could use to define why is it that people change their behaviors at that time. Next slide. Right. So yes, I'm saying that they did change their behaviors, and the behaviors changed during the different waves of the epidemic. So what do I mean by that? So by the third wave, so we had first wave, second wave, people were nonchalant, but by the third wave, there were reduced reports of stigma and discrimination. And you could see these long lines to get vaccinated due to an increased death toll. And I believe that a crisis in the situation, in the health system, a crisis in people seeing their neighbor dying from COVID, you know, that caused them to change behavior at that time. Unfortunately, that was what happened. But this is what, this is the complication of behavior change. I mean, they were getting all of these messages and everything, you know, there were centers being open. People weren't coming to get vaccinated until that third wave hit. And then everybody ran to get their vaccines. And also, in the beginning, I neglected to say this, in the beginning, we had those situations of stigma and discrimination. And we had to produce messaging. We particularly went into culture and used music and messaging that appealed to the Jamaicans, using, you know, dance and music to address that matter of stigma and discrimination. Also, there was a lot of information on your television using traditional media, you know, reporters who had, I can think of Dion Jackson Miller, for example, who is one of our, you know, prominent reporters in Jamaica and news person. She actively engaged the Jamaican population in discussing what happened to me. So that was like a live testimonial. She discussed what happened to her, and there were other public figures that came and said, this was what I felt. And there were programs just dedicated to this, where people were looking at people like them who had been affected by COVID and what they felt, how they felt. So that is important as well. When people can respond to, you know, what others have been through, it impacts them and it makes them change behavior as well. So I speak of the deaths having to, you know, have deaths be a part of what caused people to change behaviors. And we were having a lot of compliance actually in business places and offices, in control spaces. We had compliance in terms of the protocols and so on. Of course, Jamaicans had to observe the curfews and for the most part, and I say that loosely, remain indoors. So there were changes in behavior. And when you look at that, several things impacted those changes. Next slide. Right, so I spoke of the diffusion of innovations theory, and I think some of these, I'm not remembering how many Cecilia covered, but diffusion of innovation says that there are people that are going to adopt behaviors early. So there are those early adopters, if you remember. And then you're going to have people that are in the late majority, and those are laggards, right? And you will have some people that will never adopt behavior. So that is, I mean, that is the whole dilemma of behavior change, where, you know, you will have different levels of persons at different, with the TTM and the stages of change, people are at different levels and you need to meet them at the level that they're at. So with the diffusion of innovation, I would say that that's the receiving of the risk messaging, they adopted some behaviors, they actually practiced the behaviors, but then we found that after a while, the health belief model says you need to know that you're susceptible to the disease to take action. And after a while, you found that people thought that it was only the elderly that were susceptible. So they weren't doing, you know, as well and in terms of the behaviors. And so that is also an issue when people don't believe that they're susceptible to the disease, as they will not change behavior or modify what it is that they're doing. All right, I'm gonna move ahead to the fact. Can you move ahead to the relapse, right? I want to address the relapses in behavior that Cecilia mentioned, where we saw, well, I'm speaking through my lens now as a practitioner in the field. I saw less physical distancing. So whilst we adopted some behaviors, there were some that there were relapses. So when everybody thought it was okay, it's okay, you know, there's not that much going on now. The physical distancing changed. COVID fatigue set in between last year, you know, people were having to school their children at home, you know, the number of curfews, and, you know, you're not able to work from home, you're working from home. So after a while, COVID fatigue set in and people started to drop their guard. So people are now not wearing their masks, and they're now flouting the law, hiding and having parties. I don't know if you have that in Barbados, but we have people who, you know, go through extreme lengths to get, to host a party and to have the best of time, knowing full well that COVID is still around and they're still supposed to be observing the law. So people started to ignore the Disaster Risk Management Act, and the police were unable to enforce what became a kind of blow up in terms of when they went to enforce, like if there was a party and persons went, the police went to enforce the law. I recall that there were some instances where the police were stoned, their vehicles were damaged, and that as a result of people wanting to do their behaviors and not wanting to practice the safe behaviors and to do what was in the interest of the rest of the community. So that's also something when persons have not bought into the idea of my behavior affects others, my behavior affects the community, my behavior is going to translate into higher COVID numbers, more hospitalizations. That is also an issue that people do not recognize some of the times, that we can contribute to a bigger situation by just not obeying or not following the law. So there was low compliance at some of these major spaces, at the markets, at some of the entertainment spots. And in terms of COVID, I think the attitude and belief shifted based on the knowledge, and that was the early part of COVID. COVID became demystified in a way that we also did with HIV. So I believe now that in Jamaica, COVID is not that mystery as it was back in, say, March 2020. However, and that has been so because of the multi-sectoral approach. It was not just the Ministry of Health, but private sector came on board. You know, all of the information material, all of that was disseminated throughout all of the island in terms of in terms of the facilities, the quarantine facilities. Persons were, you know, given information during their quarantine. Whilst we were, this is an interesting point that I need to make, whilst we were doing the stages of taking the returning Jamaicans off the planes and off the ships when they were coming home, we had information giving them as they came off the plane, as they came from the ship, whilst they were going to the facility, we had been giving them information. So that was an important part of the response at that time as well. Next slide. All right, so I think it is important to note that there are some shifts in communication today. And so the experts have said that there are three big shifts that have caused risk communication to be so difficult in this time. And this I took from the World Health Organization document, where experts and authorities are today less trusted. And there is an issue of trust, which is now central to health communication and to risk messaging. Cecilia mentioned the whole matter of the conspiracy. There is a definite crisis in trust with regard to who are the experts now. You know, the way the public seeks health advice has shifted from the traditional sources, and it is now online and social networks that people are seeking health information and really logging on to some of those beliefs and some of those conspiracies. So it makes it that much more difficult for the communicator to get the messaging across, because half of the time it's not really believed. And behaviors take time, but also behaviors are impacted by the environment and your social setting. If your peers are not doing a behavior, it's likely. I mean, I didn't go into some of the social norms theory. Says, listen, if everybody thinks nobody's doing it, then nobody's going to do it. You know, so if your peers believe that you are not doing, you know, the peers won't do the behavior if they think you are not doing it. I went around that a roundabout way, but I'm hoping you understand what I'm saying. Those things influence behaviors. Next slide. And another shift that the experts have said is that how the media works currently, where there is now a 24-hour journalism. Everything is, you step in front of a video, you use your phone for that matter, and you make a video and it goes viral and it goes all over, you know, the world, and it's believed. And now everybody is an expert. You know, the traditional persons that this journalism is now, you know, there's a rise of opinion, and well-sourced references are now in the past. And what is happening is that people are just using their phones and, you know, reading something and becoming an expert, and people are believing them. The social influencers are powerful in this era of communication. And that is also an area that we need to tap in. Jamaica had to do some of that work with the social influencers as well, to get some of them on board, some of the musicians, some of the influencers, so that they would be able to communicate messaging that would be appropriate and needed in this time. And lastly, just a very quick look at vaccine hesitancy today. I didn't really do a lot on that, but there is sort of like a toss-up. So CARFA says there is high vaccine acceptance. However, when I looked at the Facebook study at that time, which was November 2020, there was only a 28% acceptance. And looking at the Don Anderson poll, which was done in August, between August to September, we can see that 70% of Jamaicans are saying no, we are not accepting mandatory vaccine. And, you know, so that's something that the country is grappling with in terms of, I think the government has said no, they are not considering mandatory vaccine. So, and if 70% of your population is saying that, then you know what's going to happen there. But are most Jamaicans indicating a willingness to be vaccinated? And I use the Don Anderson poll as well to look at that. And really, there is hesitancy and strong hesitancy. And if we look around the world, we can see that it's not unique to the Caribbean. It's not unique to Jamaica, but there is work to be done with regard to hearing from the population and hearing from the people. Lack of trust in the vaccine was the most regarded answer that came through in this Don Anderson poll. Can you go to the poll? Thanks. Right, so in terms of the vaccine, at the time, it was, I think it was 1,003 participants, yes, in this particular study. And as we can see from the diagram, there was a 25% of persons saying they will not take a vaccine. They will not take a vaccine. And there was that level of, decision making that they won't take it. And well, 9% had not taken it, and only 20% had already taken the vaccine. So in terms of hesitancy and vaccine uptake, Jamaica is facing, in my opinion, and as again, I'm speaking with my lens just from working in the field and being a HIV practitioner over the years, there is a level of hesitancy that's presenting now in terms of not believing the trusted sources, using the other social media influence and so on to make decisions regarding their health. And also looking at a more natural sometimes way of approaching your health is what I find on the ground. That's what I'm hearing, and that's what I'm feeling as a practitioner. So I think those are my thoughts. As I said, these were just the thoughts that I had with regard to behavior change, communication during COVID-19, and what I saw through my lens as a practitioner. I know that HIV had made significant inroads in terms of being with the people, normalizing testing, normalizing taking your meds, normalizing HIV as a disease, not to say that it was such a terminal illness, but to say that, listen, you can get on with your life with HIV. And I think some of that work needs to transfer to COVID-19 and to use, as Mr. Ellis says, the community. We need to hear from the community what it is. What are the barriers to getting this vaccine? Why is it that I know the primary barrier is the trust. How can we get them to move from not trusting to trusting? What does it require? Does it require more information? Sometimes information doesn't equate to behavior. As you know, Cecilia, you will have a lot of information and you still don't know. Right. So there's a lot to think about, and I hope I've made some sense over a few minutes that I have been presenting, and I'm open to questions at this point.
I want to thank each of you for being here. As Ms. Pratt said, you're open for question. Mr. Ellis, would you like to follow up on anything she would have had to say before we open the floor for questions?
That there is a lot that she has said, and it's quite in sync with the experience that we've had here in Barbados. And I believe that when you look at that across the Caribbean, it will be quite similar. The real challenge here has to be one of being able to counteract a lot of the negatives that have come about vaccines. But there's one important point I want to make. I believe personally that we have put a disproportionate focus on vaccination to the other important protocols in COVID. And it is, as far as I'm concerned, a big mistake. Because vaccinated or not, there are certain things that people are expected to do. So if you have your party, and I had this situation where the newspaper recently reported me as saying that I was against private. I think I was muted by the host, and so you might have missed me. But my argument is that no matter what you do, the protocols matter. So if you're going to have a private party or one that has been approved and all of that, you still need to follow the protocols. And I caution against this disproportionate focus on vaccines. The World Health Organization in the last 24 hours or so has also made the point that vaccinated people got to behave themselves because they're behaving as though they are immune to COVID.
Yeah.
They're not. Okay. Yeah. So that's the only point. I'll leave you with that.
And one of the recommendations that I would make is that we engage the support of our nurses, our student nurses, and our pharmacists and our social science students at the Barbados Community College in research, because it would assist them, helping them to understand qualitative and quantitative data better, looking at customer service, so we'll be better able to, provide better customer service by engaging in interaction with persons. So just like how the University of the West Indies students would do the give back hours, the students from the Barbados Community College, and probably the Polytechnic, this Samuel Chapman Prescott Institute would, lend their support to this effort by, telephone conversations, calling persons in home isolation to see how they're doing, how is your temperature, are you having any symptoms? We can have a little list. We can give persons, say each student would have like 30 persons or whatever. You can call, you can have your list, you can engage them. And these are all skills that students can use to better serve our country in this crisis. And it's not that we would pay them, but it's just that they'd probably be giving back hours, to the cause. And in doing that, it would be reciprocal. They would learn how to engage with persons, and in turn, we would get the information as well. So we can engage persons at, the paramedical level in various areas.
Can I add to that by saying this? I spoke earlier about the fact that Barbados, for instance, has brought in nurses from Ghana and Cuba. But there's something else that's missing from Cuba. And it has to do with the same concept of community engagement. The question is there anything that we could learn from them in relation to this community outreach? And not only in attracting people, but in maintaining that attention to the particular course that we take. I think we need to broaden the whole concept of engagement and the methods that we are using to do that. We should not be stuck in the political arena and the division that exists in relation to something like that, because we are fighting to get out of that in so many other areas. And this is that is right before us.
I'm all for that. I'm all for seeing how other persons deal with, because in doing that, we learn a lot more. We engage each other, and we learn much more than just about COVID-19. That can probably be for other areas, for example, global warming and all these other issues that we have. I think that we are very myopic in our vision with respect to this pandemic. We need to broaden our horizons so that we can have a holistic approach and get data that we can use in other areas with respect to our development.
I'm keen to hear from your colleague, our colleague there in Jamaica on this other point. And while we talk a lot about reaching out to the private sector and multi-sectoral and that sort of thing, it seems to me from the limited time that I've had exposure that a lot of work needs to be done at home. And that is first and foremost within the various government departments and government agencies, so that they have an understanding of what their role is in helping in the mission. Because unfortunately, what is happening in some places, it appears as though it is treated as though this is somebody's baby. Not mine, not ours, but somebody else's. The question is, how can we move forward if we behave like that? I don't know what happened with AIDS, because the people who were involved in the AIDS program need to share with us whether they were able to do that all on their own, or whether antiretrovirals made the difference.
It's still happening. It's just that we have the antiviral medication, yes, but the fight is not over, as we say at the National HIV/AIDS Commission. The fight is not over. It's just that COVID-19 has taken up, and the global warming has taken up the spotlight, but the fight is not over.
Right. I would say in my response to that would be that Jamaica used a multi-prong approach. Yes, the ARVs have been where we've kind of gotten that level of support from the Global Fund. But in terms of the multi-sectoral approach, Jamaica had to use has had to use a kind of workplace policy. We've had, in terms of HIV, using the Ministry of Labor to say this is what needs to happen in terms of your workplace. Your workplace needs to be an environment where nobody feels stigmatized or discriminated. So, workplace policy came on board, an HIV workplace policy. There are other non-governmental organizations that took on the messaging as well and sort of brought in other members of the population and of the different ministries to come on board so that the response to HIV was a more overall multi-sectoral response. So the Ministry of Tourism got involved and, all of those sectors would have, because that would have been a development and issue as well, which is where COVID-19 is. In terms of currently with COVID-19, the Ministry of Health carries most of the burden, but the private sector is heavily involved. And also I think from the disaster management, from the disaster risk management, a lot of the Ministry of Justice and the support from the police and all of that, it still is involving more players than just the Ministry of Health.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have a few questions in the chat. Karina, you have any questions that needs to go to the panel?
Yes, I have some questions. The first question is from Lisa. She asked, how have you approached persons who are afraid to get the vaccine and who see the risk of catching COVID less scary than the benefits of getting the vaccine? There's a lot of mistrust and conspiracy theories out there that it feels like. I don't know which one of you want to take that question, but basically she's saying, how do you, what is the approach that is required, to convince persons who feel that the risk of catching COVID is less scary than the benefits of getting the vaccine?
Want to take that, Ms. Brathwaite?
Well, I can take it if you want me to.
We will,
because
yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Ellis.
I think that we are in an environment where a lot of learning needs to take place. There is no complete expertise on this issue. And we are at a point where we're going to have to try different approaches in trying to understand how we seek to combat that kind of perception. And I ask the same question. I cannot understand why a person would take a greater risk of catching COVID and becoming seriously ill than taking the vaccine. But there are so many people out there who are like that. And the research is crucial because we need to do the research to understand the different reasons, because there's no one reason. And one of the interesting aspects of this COVID-19 situation is that it presents us with an opportunity for new learning. How do you see it?
I'm in agreement with you on that, Mr. Ellis. I recall that when we go now to the population, we're in communities. My teams are in communities. And when we say, get your HIV test done, people's response typically is, I can live with HIV. Cancer is worse than HIV. So why do I need to get my test done? And if I do get my test done, I will survive. And I'm thinking that if I'm to apply that similarly to COVID, people are thinking, oh, well, I'm seeing people surviving COVID. I don't know what's in the vaccine. I am not trusting this vaccine. And there's that level of mistrust is so high that people are unwilling to take the vaccine. They would rather take their chances, go through the disease because they have seen survivors of the disease and they're okay. And that's what I'm thinking. It's similar. HIV has that similar thing where, you know, nobody is being discriminated and there's less stigma for HIV now. So I can go through, have unprotected sex, I can get HIV, but I will be on my meds, so I'll be happy. And maybe that's what's happening with COVID, where I can get COVID, but I'll be okay. So only the persons who are really feeling that severity of risk in terms of COVID, the elderly and so on, and the persons who have comorbidities, those are the people that are going to do the behavior and adapting the procedures and the protocols in a way that, you know, is sustained. That's what my response would be.
But to that, my response would be look at the long-term effect. For example, with HIV, yes, you have the medication, but the long-term effects are tremendous. And so as with COVID-19, the long-term effects are tremendous as well. So although you may survive it, it impacts you in a great way for years to come. Yeah.
And that is our response to them. You know, that is how we sell, you know, and say, no, well, you know, there is you have to take your meds every single day at the same time. So there's a level of, you know, inconvenience, and this is something that you can't turn back, you know. So I think we may have to introduce that as a way of response to the average person who comes and say, well, I can get COVID, but what happens in the long term? Have you seen the long-term effects of COVID-19 on people? Right. I mean, there are even issues with regard to sexuality as a long-term effect. I don't know if in Barbados that has come up, but, you know, it has come up about you know, the performance, you know, after COVID, you know, kind of thing. So there are issues that we need to discuss frankly with the population. And just to say, the participatory approach in these discussions with the population is perhaps where we're going to see more. So, you know, focus group discussions surrounding what are the barriers and why are you not doing the behaviors in a way that is not judgmental, listening to the population, hearing what their responses are, and formulating some, you know, interventions and responses to that.
And
okay, we have a person whose hand is raised. Cecilia, would you like to give us your question now?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It's not really a question, it's just maybe something to, based on my observation and my practice as well. What I've seen is that many a times practitioners come with a wealth and a development that the ordinary people do not have. The wealth of information, all this statistical information, which give us a higher level of knowledge, so that we could bridge information across to them, and we could appreciate and understand the gravity of the situation. But the ordinary people on the streets, one of the reasons of probably why they're hesitant in moving forward and getting the vaccination is that for them, the reality of the side effects of getting a vaccine, the complications coming around about it, it's far more real because they see it. So their reality and their development and their knowledge base is much more limited than we that have much more information and could see far more and could appreciate far more the gravity of the situation. And so for them, when we are talking to them, when we are trying to bridge this gap, when we're trying to advocate to taking this vaccine, many a times it comes across as if we're talking to them from a superiority level rather than to being more of a persuasive manner that, you know, it's good, it's beneficial for you. And the longer run, it's better, and you could further explain. So many a times, I think practitioners on the field, when they go out, instead of talking with, they talk at. And I think that is where individuals, especially adults, would take this, would build this wall and not allow the communication to be effective. So I think we must be cognizant of all these things, because these are all barriers that do not allow us to continue this education program. Just a 2 cents of mine.
We thank you for that interjection. So what you're saying really is that we have to have persons who are really speaking to the man on the street and breaking down the information in a way that it is understood by the ordinary person in the street.
Madam Moderator?
Yes, sir.
I think she's going more further than that, though. It is not just understanding what the person on the street is saying, but listening to what that person is saying.
Yeah.
Because one of the major issues that we can face is, I come into contact with somebody who's an anti-vaxxer, and I get involved in a robust debate with that person about vaccines and the efficacy and all of that, rather than listen to that person's reality and try to understand how I am going to tailor a message.
There's perspective.
Better suited to that particular individual. Now that brings us to another very important question. If we want to go into the community, then we have to train people at various levels to communicate with people in the community. And I don't believe it begins and ends with having a cadre of people that you send out there. But I think that you also have to use the people whose jobs keep them in the community on a daily basis.
Yeah.
After your phase has ended, those are the same people that you're going to have to depend on for the next phase of COVID-19 or any other disease that arises. So this is all of your players. Your police, for instance, should be in a position to understand what COVID does to the body. I'm not here to tell you take the vaccine, but I'm here to educate you, to leave you informed, and to put you in a position to make an informed choice. If at the end of the day you don't want to take the vaccine, that is up to you. Your nurses should also be put in that position as well, not to fight with people. And I don't believe in going out there and being adversarial with people who have a different view. And I believe that's the point that was being made.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Our community development officers, our youth commissioners, persons who work with sports. These are persons who are on the ground. These are persons who know the nuts and crannies of each and every area. We need to interface with these persons so they can be trained just in case, they come upon a group that needs to answer some questions or need to ask some questions, that they'll have the correct information. Because we assume, because they are practitioners in their own right, that they have the information, but this may not always be the case. So we really need to communicate with these different entities and varying government departments so that we can help bring about behavior change from a holistic point of view. And what I want to add to that too is that we're looking at the government departments. You know, we should be going into the government departments where persons feel really at home, and providing a level of support as well, having persons probably walk through the departments, you know, intermittently to see if persons are following the protocol, because that is where you have a lot of relaxed behaviors in the departments when persons are comfortable, you know, with their colleagues after working with them for 10 or 15 years. You know, I can still hug and kiss you, you know, because no one is here, the doors are closed. So we really need to engage our government and private sector entities as well to see how best we can provide a level of behavior change in those areas, to see how best we can reduce some of the issues that we have in the private and public sector as well.
If I may also add.
Okay, after you.
Sorry, you go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to add before I forgot that there are also influentials. We traditionally refer to them as gatekeepers of communities. And those are very, very important persons to have on board with any kind of community engagement that you're having. So they may be within the formal system, as in the gatekeepers and the influentials, maybe the teachers, the policemen, you know, the persons of influence in the communities. And let us not forget the pastors and the religious leaders in our
formal sector.
Right, the informal sector as well has a number of influentials that can make a difference in a community if they buy in. And that's where I think we would need to engage those persons at that level to and we have had to do that with HIV in terms of when you're going into a community, you don't just go in and present that you have the answer and you have all the information. You go in, you speak, you do your groundwork, you know, engage a community at a level that they are now on board with you, and then you present what you need to present. And
I can tell you that we had a session here in Barbados an evening with a number of the faith-based leaders, and we brought together about over 230 of these people with a doctor explaining to them how COVID impacts on the body. We weren't here to sell vaccination. Mm-hmm. We were here to sell to them how it works. All right. I think that there's a lot to be said for that particular outreach, because after you've been able to get them to understand, they're the ones that you then have to include in the whole process of communicating with the people in the community. And we have a situation which I believe is not peculiar to us. We have younger people who take care of the elderly, who tell them they should not be vaccinated. Mm-hmm. They are held hostage by their children.
Yeah.
All right. And how do we actually work with everybody to deal with that? Ideally, what I think is that we're gonna have to train other people in the communication process as well, so that they don't go out there and pick fights, but they listen and feedback. Mm-hmm. And that includes your teachers, your policemen, your people who work assisting the elderly. There's also a role for the private sector, because there are private sector interests. One of the things we picked up in the first of the community engagement sessions that we did was that communities do not have access to enough masks and enough sanitizers. Mm-hmm. And that the private sector and the public sector have to work together to make these things available. Because in many of the depressed communities, people have to make a choice between buying masks and buying food.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yes, thank you so much for your feedback. We have one last question before we wrap up. Paige is asking, how do we become a part of the association or get access to information relating to it? I think that's a question for Cecilia and or Cheryl.
Yes, we are on Facebook, the Caribbean Association of Behavior Change Specialists, or you can contact me at 246-230. Roseanne, 246-823-113. Sorry, it's a new number. 831-823-113. Yes. You can contact me or you can go on Facebook. We are on Facebook and you can send me a message.
Right, before we go, we have Carcine who has her hand raised. You may go ahead and open your mic and ask your question.
Hi, good night, panel. David, Mr. Ellis, good evening. Perhaps I missed it. I'm not sure if you touched it, but one of the questions that I have for you is, to what extent are behavior change specialists like Cecilia are being incorporated into the Barbados COVID-19 response mechanism?
Well, I think that Cecilia can speak for herself, but even before she does, I can tell you that she is part of the process that we are engaging in right now. I spoke just now about the whole question of community and engagement, and we've started in the city, and she has been central to that particular effort. Cecilia, you can expand on it.
Well, thank you very much for that support, sir. Well, the organization that I am currently in, the Behavior Change organization, we are here, we have a wealth of knowledge, and we are here to give any technical support whenever necessary. I engaged with the Critical Missions organization to assist them with the behavior change models and efforts. However, our services can be utilized further, because I think that although we are focusing on behavior change, there's so much we can work with the tourism with respect to behavior change and how persons in the tourist sector feel now about tourists coming into the hotel and how comfortable they are. We had some interesting topics with HIV when persons would come from other territories. Persons felt discriminated against when they enter certain hotels, and we can lend our support in other areas apart from behavior change. But we are here. If any other island or if any other country needs us, we are here to lend our support. I'm here to lend it to Jamaica, Trinidad, whichever island needs our assistance, as with Barbados as well. So we are here, and I know that Mr. Ellis spoke about finances, but we are here to lend our support. I always say to that is that University of the West Indies did so much for me, and a lot of others that we really need to give back. And I'm happy that the University of the West Indies chapter of Barbados and the alumni for Jamaica come together to have these seminars, these webinars to inform, citizens about what we do and how best to bring about behavior change and to bring about a holistic approach to some of the social issues that we have in our society.
I can add to that by telling you that Cecilia asked me, I made contact with her, or she made contact with me,
yes,
about participating in this very exercise that we are doing this evening. Yes. And as a consequence of that, I said, well, you're just the kind of person we need, because this is the direction in which we need to go. And therefore, she became involved in the project that we are engaged in at the moment. And we want as many people as possible to assist us in this regard, because the whole region needs to look at this. And I hope that you don't end up like HR and PR people, which is they only call you in when there's a crisis.
Yeah, I
hope so too. Thank you, sir. I really hope so. I really hope so.
Go ahead, Mr. Ellis. I want Monique James to ask her last question. She just took her hand down. So I wanted to ask her a question before we go.
Somebody was asking a question though.
Yeah, Monique. somebody's asking a question. Now that person go ahead, and then Monica, you can go.
I was actually making a follow-up comment regarding. Yeah, sorry. Thank you for that. I'm happy to hear about the incorporation of persons like Cecilia. I think they have an important role to play. So thank you for sharing that. A follow-up comment, Brother David, is I think as we look at behavioral change, perhaps more need to be done in incorporating, with their permission, of course, survivors of the disease called COVID-19, sharing in a greater way their experience dealing and battling with COVID-19, so that others who think that this is a false disease, it doesn't exist, would see that this is a real experience for many of the survivors. What are your thoughts on that, the greater incorporation of survivors?
You know, the survivors that I really want? The anti-vaxxers who got sick and changed their minds after they got sick. I agree with you.
Yes.
That those testimonials are required. Now, let me say this, though. In all of this, research is crucial. And there are many things that have been done in Jamaica, as we've heard this evening, in Barbados and other places. We hear the talk about trying to reach the youth and using these so-called influencers. Many of the times, people tell you that you need to get to youth influencers. They tell you go and look for singers. Where's the evidence that that really works?
Yeah.
You know, it may work in some instances, it may not in others. And this is where this whole matter needs to be research driven. There's no doubt about it. And, you know, we need facilities, we need financing, we need goodwill, because not everything requires money, but it just requires various actors within the public and the private sectors working together to facilitate it. And therefore, we have a major job on our hands right now, convincing other people about the importance of this area that is called risk communications and community engagement.
Yes, we need to look at all levels of the channel in bringing about behavior change. And I was happy to see that when my colleague did her presentation, I didn't even send mine to Ms. Pratt. We were both trying to beat the clock because of work. And I was happy to see that we had some of the same ideas, because it's founded in the stages of behavior change. And at every level, we need to identify the barriers and find strategies and interventions to meet these specific target groups so that we can bring about behavior change. And when I look at research, yes, we need to get research. We need to get the information. We need to get all the demographic data so we can ably find a common ground between what we've heard and what we need to tell them, what we need to let them know with respect to the knowledge, so that we can change the attitudes and improve the behaviors. But we want to make sure that the relapse doesn't occur that quickly in the process. We want to make sure that although we create our behavior change interventions, that we have our partners involved. But with respect to having our partners involved, we want to make sure that it's just not data that we have gathered, and then we go and find our influencers and we create this off jingles named COVID-19. We want to make sure that we have a strategic focus. Without a strategic focus, we're back to square one. We wasted our money, we wasted our time, we wasted all of this information. We want to make sure that it is strategically structured so that we can have a holistic approach to this whole COVID-19. Because if we have another wave, we're going to be back to square one. So we need to get it right. We need the data, we need the support, we need the stakeholders, and we need persons to come on board with new ideas and with creative ways, taking into consideration that there is a foundation to this approach. So we really want that the private sector and public sector see the needs. We don't want that. That's what I'm against. This body saying it should be this and it should be this. The teacher say, let's use this medium. And then the social worker say, let's use this medium. And then the psychologist say, let's use this medium. We want to make sure that there is a holistic approach, yes, but there's some foundation. There's some foundation to our interventions so that when we are doing our evaluation, we would know where the base was and we would know what our goals and objectives were, and if we have met all of those goals and objectives.
Well, you first of all have to convince policymakers.
Okay, when you're ready, I'm here.
A selling mission. Well, we've been successful so far in the context of Barbados because it is getting the support at the level that is required. But if you want to do all of this, that is the first step. And from there, you have to sell it to the entire public service or the critical areas of the public service and to the private sector as well.
Right.
Yes, these are basic interventions.
And if
government, yes.
Right. So the foundation, I think, will be research and hearing from the people what are the barriers and why they're not doing the behaviors. I think that is a part of the research that needs to happen. But just to say also that in collaborating, we get to, there's a saying that says, together we achieve more. So if, as you're saying, Cecilia, everyone is collaborating and on board and looking at the strategies together, then there could be, you know, everyone's bits coming together and making the difference to the interventions as well.
Okay, Monique, can you go ahead, please? And then we'll wrap up.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Roseanne. Good evening, everyone. Monique Jean. I just wanted to, there was so much I had to say, but because of time, I would just try to say it was a good initiative. I enjoyed the evening's discussion. However, I just want to say, like, when we are planning and we're having all different activities and interventions, so far for COVID, everything have been driven and directed by science. And I heard Cecilia in her opening remarks speaking about the theory of planned behavior and spoke about, and also the facilitator, the presenter from Jamaica, Ms. Peart, if I call your name correctly, everyone was able to speak about different theories that they used or that would have been used to, that can be used to inform policy or decisions or intervention. And that is what have been directing COVID so far. And despite we may think that it is okay to try other things, I think there's so many best practices out there that we can tap into and use it to guide behaviors. Well, sorry, use it to change the intentions of persons which would then lead to impact their behaviors. And because we are dealing with human beings, I want us to remember we could sit in boardrooms as professionals. We can sit as everyone and plan really great things. But in order for an intervention or any kind of impact to be made in society, we need to really start with the people. And the reason why, if persons are seeing or thinking that they are forced or being subjected, being like pushed one side, or that they don't have a right or have a part to play in, and they feel as though their right is being taken away from them, it would obviously make them react in a negative sense. For me, whenever I go through this entire COVID experience, because I was trained in HIV as well, it just took me right back to the beginning. And I just think that we are going back down to the same way again. And I remember when the HIV/AIDS Commission, when they were summoned with the fact that the World Bank maybe would have cut the funding and stuff, we were trained by John Hopkins. And he said, he gave us this model. And every single time we tested our projects that we were developing, the one that required the most attention or that would that would cause the project to be most impactful was human resource. And across this Caribbean island, we have it. Across Barbados, we have it. We have many trained psychologists, social workers, community practitioners. But I think that what is missing is genuineness from people and the persons who actually have to interact with people. You cannot use the same messenger for across the board because one brush can't paint it all. And I think that real engagement, because young people know when people are real and when people are not. And I think if you say that that's the area where the issues are and it's being said all the time, find someone that will be able to address it and meet them where they are. We say, but we hardly do it. And we are going to spend a lot of money in influencers and singers, but if the message that they're bringing is incorrect, and the wording that they use, it will cause a negative reactance, hence forcing us back 10 steps when we thought that we just made 5. So I just want to encourage everybody. Yes, we say we were going to take if everybody work in isolation, but I'm just, as a person who's out in the field, I just find that we talk a lot, we talk a lot, we come together a lot, but it is hard to actually impact at the ground, because those who sit and talk around the table are not the ones who really interact with the young people, or the persons in the community, those who are at risk and vulnerable. So in order to plan and to go out there, we need to hear from them first and then plan. And I think that's where I would, and just to say, it is not for us to encourage or influence policymakers. Sometimes you can start at the bottom and work our way up. I think that's my closing.
At the end of the day, policymakers also determine where the emphasis is going to be, and if you know, it works both ways. But let me say to you, for us in Barbados, I think we really understand what is being said in that regard. I think we have had the benefit, though, of having had people like you and so many others who have worked in the HIV AIDS program. And, you know, COVID is borrowing not only from that particular sphere, but from other areas where we have had to look at behavioral science. And therefore, that puts us in a position where we could have an advantage in that regard. I mean, in Jamaica, the same thing applies. And I certainly am caught up in the whole idea of community engagement as being the #1 response to misinformation and disinformation in small communities. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monique.
Karina?
That's all our questions for this evening. I'd like to thank all our presenters, contributors to this important discussion, Cheryl, David, and to thank our audience for being on for the entirety of this webinar. It was amazing, and from the UR Alumni Relations team, I extend our, heartiest gratitude towards to you all. So in wrapping up, I'd like to just tell everyone have a good night, and so continue the conversations in your communities, in your households, in your networks, in your social groups, wherever. Continue the conversation, because this is an important conversation to be had. So have a good night, everyone, and we'll see you for the next webinar. Bye.
Have a good night. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.